Hey, Chaim.
Hi, Yako. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
All right.
Good.
Recovered from Purim?
Yeah, more or less.
I'm not sure what I'm recovering more from, Purim or staying up all night watching the news.
Yeah. Yes, it's an interesting situation, interesting world. Crazy.
Yep. Interesting times.
We live in interesting times, right? It's very true. Very true.
Well, I think that at least the missile barrages are becoming weaker, even though they're still there, but I don't think they're
Yeah.
as strong as they were before. So,
The Wall Street, I don't know if you saw a Wall Street Journal article on this.
no.
Okay, I think it's in today's. I saw it online. They build these missile cities. This is what they call them, where they're all underground, which turned out to be a terrible strategy because now the Israeli and American planes just hover over the entrance to these missile cities, and when anything comes out, they just bomb it. Missile launchers, trucks, etc. So
Mm,
what they built all underground to shield their missile supply has actually turned out to be a terrible logistical blunder
mm.
because you know they know exactly where they are. So when they just wait there, and so the Iranians actually apparently figured this out. Unfortunately, very soon before the bombing. So they did try to get mobile launchers out, and they got some out, but not most of them. The vast majority are in these missile cities,
Buried.
buried.
So the entrances are basically blocked.
Correct. And they bomb them. Apparently, there aren't that many cluster, the 70 bomb busting munitions aren't that many, so you can't just bomb all of them. But they bombed a few reaching on the ground. The others, they just sit by and wait till they try to come out.
Yeah.
Uh, so it turned out to be a classic blunder,
Mm.
putting them in these places. I mean, the pictures they're just, I mean, they look like AI. They're just missiles and missiles, row after row going, the length of these missile cities, thousands and thousands of ballistic missiles. But so we're all hoping that it's not a tactical move, that in fact they're exhausted, or they are exhausting their supply, and that's that.
Yeah. It's the resupplies that are
Right.
interesting.
Well,
So happy Yaakov is here because Yaakov sometimes can't do it on Wednesdays.
yeah, well, I'm actually in Toronto, so I couldn't go to the shir anyway. But the reality is, it's interesting because Rabbi Maslow, who gives the shir, canceled because he's not feeling well. So it's all min hashamayim worked out.
Abe,
Yeah,
thank you for that safer.
yeah, it's interesting.
So that
Well,
is
Eva's son.
that's Eva's son.
Yeah,
So he's Rav somewhere?
no, he's not really. He's in business, but in
Business.
his spare time, he writes for him.
Is this the skateboard guy?
What?
One of her sons used to make skateboards.
That's the other son.
Wow, okay.
He still does.
And he's like you on the side. He writes books and he writes.
Right, right.
I
Busy,
didn't
busy.
I didn't know that that Eva had her son does that. 141 is where we left off. Dangerous animals. Um we ended up with leniencies about dogs and cats as domesticated animals, which would not be subject to trapping according to Rab Karelitz. As in every malacha, the archetype of trapping is based on the terms in which trapping was done in the construction of the Mishkan, in which animals were trapped in order to make use of them. Thus, by definition, if someone traps animals solely for the purpose of neutralizing them, such an action is classified as Malacha She'ein Tzrich Legufa, it means in the Mishkan they needed the animal for its hide. But if you're just going to, let's say, trap them so they won't attack anybody, you're not doing the malacha for the same reason that it was done in the Mishkan. That, when you do it that way, it's called malacha she'ein tzrich legufa. Just like we have a machlokas between Rab Shimon and Rab Yehuda by davar she'ein miskavein, where Rab Shimon says that's mutter. We have the same thing with malacha she'ein tzrich legufa that Rab Shimon is makel there as well. Mario, we're on page 141. As has been discussed previously, the Tanoim, followed by the Rishonim, debate whether Malacha She'ein Tzrich Legufa is forbidden midrabanan midaraisa. Most Rishonim hold that Malacha She'ein Tzrich Legufa is forbidden midrabanan. The Rambam holds it's midaraisa. According to the Gemara, Masechta Shabbos, Chazal permitted a person to perform certain otherwise questionable actions in order to prevent damage. Among the actions cited, the Gemara mentions trapping a threatening animal. Amar Shmuel kol ptur de Shabbos potter of alaser, lebar mehani tlas de potter mutter. Whenever in Masechta Shabbos we're used to, it says if you do such and such, you're chayiv. In Masechta Shabbos, chayiv means you're chayiv achatas. That's usually because usually we're talking about somebody doing b'shogeg. Of course, chayiv could mean skila if it was done b'mezid with two witnesses with asra. But usually the word chayiv in Shabbos, wherever it appears in Shabbos, means you're chayiv achatas. When it says patur, it's patur of alaser. It means it's rabbinically prohibited. This Gemara in Shabbos Kuf Zayin gives us three exceptions where when it says patur, it means it's mutter, it's permitted. Idich, and another one of the ones that are permitted is hatzad nachash b'Shabbos. You trap a snake on Shabbos. Imisasik bo shelo yashchenu. It says that if you occupy yourself with the snake in trying to prevent it from biting you, it's patur. And here when we say patur, it means mutter. It means it's permitted. If you trap him in l'refuah chai, let's say you need to get his venom to make anti-venom, or let's say there was some direct refuah in the venom, then that would be prohibited midaraisa. The Gemara wants to know mimai de pater umutter. How do you know that this is one of those cases where when it says pater, it's not pater of loss, but rather it's pater and permitted?
Ernie, just to clarify, when it says
yes,
that you can't trap it, that's assuming that whatever you're using is not for a pikuach nefesh, of course.
Well, that's misasik bo shelo yashchenu. That's what you're doing
Shelo
something.
yashchenu, but if you're trapping
it so it won't bite you.
That's one thing.
If you're talking about a venomous snake, well, that's pikuach nefesh.
But if you're trapping it in order to get the venom, the venom, so you can use the venom.
Oh, that's yeah. That would be.
That's what you just said. You said for refuah, but I guess it depends if the refuah is saying that you need, well, I said a different way. If you have a general trap, because your business is to create a refuah into venom, but you don't know when the snake's going to arrive. You don't know who's going to need it, but when someone does need to have it.
The reason they're giving this example because in the Mishkan, they trapped animals and then they used whatever, let's say the skin or the hide. So the same thing. Here they're talking about trapping a nachash because you need it to treat somebody. We're not talking about we're talking about treating somebody which is not a pikuach nefesh. Because if you needed it for pikuach nefesh, then of course you'd be permitted to do it. You would not be chayiv for it. Mm-hmm. But we're talking about, let's say refuah, let's say for a headache, or something else that's a refuah that's not necessarily.
Well, I'm asking. My case is a little different. I understand what you have, but a headache. If you're trapping it because you want to build up your stockpile of anti-venom let's say your stockpile's low, you ran out of anti-venom, and you live in an area where people get bitten often. So
You wouldn't be allowed to do that on Shabbos unless somebody was lefanenu. There's a
only
principle
lefanenu.
of lefanenu. That means if the person was in front of you and you needed it right now, then you'd be permitted to do it. You can't do, for example, you can't do an autopsy on you can't do an autopsy b'chlal, but let's say you could even do it on Shabbos if you needed it right now. If not, you'd have to do it either before or after Shabbos. The same thing with here. But if there was a pikuach nefesh issue, then you'd be allowed to do it no matter what. Here we're talking about trapping a snake for the purpose of refuah, where it's not pikuach nefesh, and you'd be chayv achatas for doing it because you're trapping the animal for using the animal. You're not allowed to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But for example, you're trapping the animal to keep it away from you. That's the malacha she'ein tzrich legufa.
Yeah.
It's not the way the malacha was done in the Mishkan, so that's the leniency. And in fact, the Gemara asks me, "My depoter umuter." How do you know that in this case it's permitted? This not. Koifin ka'ara laner bishvil shloitechos b'koira. Normally, you're not allowed to cover a flame on Shabbos. But if you're afraid that the flame is going to cause something to catch fire, you're allowed to put the plate over the nair. The altsoa shall cotton. Let's say a child has gone to the bathroom on the floor, you can cover it. Vel akrav shlotishach, or on a scorpion, so it won't bite. These are permitted. You're allowed to do these things. It's not. It's permitted. On the basis of that Gemara, the Shulchan Aruch rules that a person may trap all hazardous creatures. Hatzad nechashim b'Shabbos. If you trap a snake on Shabbos, or shar ramoshim amazikim, or other dangerous insects or creatures, im l'refuah chai. If it's some kind of medicinal purpose, again, you're not allowed to do it because that's not even malacha she'ein tzrich legufa. That's a malacha she'tzrich legufa. That's the way the malacha was done in the Mishkan. It's an av malacha. That's the standard way of tzad. Vim b'shvil shelo yishchenu. But if the trapping was that it shouldn't bite you, well, that's not why they trapped animals in the Mishkan. So you have this tour of malacha she'ein tzrich legufa, and it's not just potter, but it's mutter. Says the Shulchan Aruch. The Mishnah Berurah explains the allowance is not limited to those creatures which pose an immediate threat to a person's life. Because we're not using pikuach nefesh here. We're using the tour of malacha she'ein tzrich legufa. Like Chaim said, if it's some kind of pikuach nefesh, then we know it's going to be permitted. But that's not. Even if it's not, it's permitted because that's not how the malacha of tzad was done in the Mishkan. And therefore, it's malacha she'ein tzrich legufa. We paskin like those that say that it's permitted. Says the Mishrayna afilu b'makom she'ein regila nechashim lahamis. We're not talking about poisonous snakes. Vein ratzin achrav ela oimdim b'mkoma. And the snake isn't even chasing him; they're just there. Afilu hachi letzodin shari. Even so, to hunt them is permitted. The hainu. Koif alein kli, you could put a kli over it. Or shekoisha, you could tie them up. The atam dahava malacha she'ein tzrich legufa. The reason is because it falls under the category, like we've explained, of malacha she'ein tzrich legufa. The ein tzarich lotzud el shelo yishchenu. You don't need any of the part of the animal for any purpose. You just want to keep it away from you so it doesn't bite you. If he knew it wasn't going to attack him, he'd leave it alone. We know the malacha she'ein tzrich legufa potter av alosser midrabanan. In a regular case, we've already said that malacha she'ein tzrich legufa is potter av alosser. It's midrabanan prohibited. But mishum hezeka, right? One of the three exceptions where it says potter av mutter was a snake. because of potential damage, the rabbis lifted their gzeira. It's important halacha. Aruch HaShulchan explains that the standard prohibition regarding locha shein tzrich legufa does not apply in this case, because trapping generally involves bringing it into one's possession, whereas here one wishes to distance the animal from himself. B'tzidik kishalon yiskavin lotzu del lahagen shlo yishchenu. He says ein ze b'chlal tzeda. He says sort of trapping it or covering. It's not even trapping it, because you just want to keep it away from you. Ein ze b'chlal tzeda klal. The tzeda ikar kavanos l'tzud l'rshuso. The whole point of trapping is to trap it in your possession. Uvakan ikar kavanos l'archik. The Aruch HaShulchan says the whole point here was to keep it away from you. Vava hefech mamish mitzeda. It's literally the opposite of hunting or trapping. So he wants to make an argument that it's not. You don't have to come on to melacha shein tzrich legufa. L'chein gam in melacha shein tzrich legufa lo shayich kan. Dein zum melacha klal. He says there's no melacha at all. Kivin shu hefech miikar kavanas melacha. Shulchan Aruch HaRav, right, the Balatanya, explains that this permission applies only to animals whose bite is hazardous. But in the case of animals which merely cause discomfort or minor pain, they may not be trapped. The heter is animals that will damage you. Kigon nechoshim, snakes, vakrovim, and scorpions. Even if they don't kill you, they can damage. It becomes red, cellulitis, certainly anything similar to that. But if it's not damaging to the body, it's uncomfortable. He says, kagon sira, like a wasp, uzvuv, a fly, v'yetushin, mosquitoes, pirushin, or fleas, and then you cannot trap those. The next section will return to the issue of insects. Regarding snakes, the Yalkut Yosef accepts the position of the Ashkenazic Achronim. Osir lotzud nachash b'Shabbos, elim ken oisa ken b'shvil shelo yishchenu. You cannot trap a snake on Shabbos unless you're doing it to prevent it from biting you. Vafilu meina nachash memis b'neshichaso, even if it's not a venomous snake. V'gam imeino ratzach rav, even if it doesn't run after him, ela oimed bimkomo, it's even just standing there. Afilu hachi mutar l'tzorim b'shos adei kvias kli alav v'chadoyme. Right, because the Shulchan Aruch, who you would think normally the Yalkut Yosef, the Yosef family usually follows the Shulchan Aruch, just said in Bishur Shlo Yashchenu Mutter, didn't necessarily go into detail like the Mishnah Berurah and the Aruch HaShulchan did, that even if it's just sitting there, you could trap it. So he goes along with that's what he says, the later Ashkenazic Achronim. What about biting insects? We've discussed animals which cause serious harm. According to Tosfos, it's permitted to catch or remove even a pest, which merely causes pain with its bite. Although the term trapping is not mentioned explicitly in Tosfos, his entire discussion revolves around Rabbi Yeshua's ruling, according to which a person is exempt for trapping a flea. According to Tosfos, this refers to a scenario in which the person catches and then discards the pest. Says Tosfos by Shabbos Kuf Zayin, Hatsadis apirush, if you trapped a flea. So Rabbi Yeshua Paters, mashma de potter of a losser. He says it's mashma that it's potter, but you're not allowed to do it. V'oimer ri b'shem harav porad. Dafilu hachi noishech adam mutter. If it's a kind of insect that bites people, you can trap it. You can grab it, likachenu lashlichoma, and then throw it away. Because it's uncomfort, it causes discomfort, it's permitted. But if the insect's on the person and he's not afraid of being bitten, it's on his sleeve, then you can't grab it. But you can knock it off, but not grab it. But that would be a problem of tzad. Now, the prohibition of moving muktzah items, which include living creatures, is also weighed in cases in which the muktzah item can potentially cause harm to others. The same is true with respect to removing a thorn from the public domain so that others do not step on it. According to Tosfos, there is room for leniency if the flea is biting. The Beis Yosef observes that on one hand, Tosfos may be read to permit seizing only an insect which is actively biting. On the other hand, Tosfos also indicates that it's permitted only to knock away an insect which is merely sitting on the outside of one's garment. Thus, the Beis Yosef observes, Tosfos' position remains ambiguous in the intermediate case, in which the insect is inside the clothing but not actively biting you. Loshna Tosfos shekosafti tzarich digduk. It requires analysis. The Meresha Delishna Mashma, initially, his language is Deloshoili Tala, that you cannot really grab it, Elabishas Shenoishechas Dafka. It's only Dafka when he's biting you. Because you're dealing with it so as not to bite you. Then that was the heter of trapping. Haim Eino Alabasser. But if the insect is not on your skin, Afal Pishihi Al Bigdo Mibifnei Masr, even if it's on the inside, it's not on the outside of your clothing, it's actually on the inside. You would think that Tosfos would prohibit. However, Miseifa Delish the Mashman, the Dafke Shial Sarvolim Bachutz, it's only when the insect is on your garment on the outside, the Lekala Mecha Shamin Ashkanu. There, nobody's going to be worried that it's going to bite you. That's when Huda Asuli Tola Aval Imhial Bigdo Mibifni. But if it's on your skin inside, maybe you have a reason to medayik from Tosfos, Kiven the Ikala Mecha Shamin Ashkanu Sharlitla. So the Beis Yosef is going back and forth. He's not sure how you're medayik from Tosfos, how the din should be. So in light of this ambiguity, Rav Yosef Karo adopts a stringent position in the Shulchan Aruch. He rules that it's permitted to seize a flea only while biting him. Parush, a flea, Hanikra Bargut, Beloshan Arav. In Arabic, it's called a bargut. Asr latsudo, you can't trap it. Unless it's on your skin and actively biting you. However, as cited by the Mishnah Berurah, other authorities permit plucking the flea from inside your clothing to prevent it from biting you. It means it doesn't have to be actively biting you for you to get rid of it. Yesh makilin. Gam kishu al chaluko mibifnim litlo biyado lashlicho. There are those that permit grabbing it with your hand and getting rid of it. Penyavoli de'akitza, because it might come to bite you. If you can sort of get rid of it without actually grabbing it, that's better. Regarding contemporary practice, the Shmir Shabbos Kilchasa writes that a person may rely upon the Mishnah Berurah to size or remove an insect which is going to bite you, even if it's merely sitting upon your skin. But you may not kill it. You can get rid of it. You can grab it and throw it somewhere.
But what about if it's the kind of insect that you can't do that to? You have a bee on your skin or a wasp. It's not, you can't just take it and throw it away. You either kill it or you absorb the bite, which, is not a fun thing. What about that?
Or you're going to kill it on your hat? But if you're going to flick it, meaning by killing it, I think it's going to bite you. That means, what are you going to do? Potch it like that?
Yeah, I guess you're right.
I think it's going to bite you. I think you can flick it.
Yeah, apparently that's what the Shmir Shabbos Kochas says.
Well, let's see what he says. Chorikim charikim acherim, other insects, kigon yutushim, like mosquitoes. Shomnam alulim lakotzes dada. I mean, in the summer you'll see a mosquito on your arm, maybe even before he bites you. Shomnam alulim lakotzes dada. I mean, a mosquito that bites you, it's not going to cause you pain. I mean, you're going to itch from it, right? Just get rid of it. Flick it off, but don't actually grab it. Now, in the act of biting you, or it's on your flesh, Even if they're not biting you yet. If there's no other way, like Yaakov said, if there's no other way to get rid of them, you can, I guess, trap it with a kli or something, or grab it with your hand, right? So you've hunted them. You can grab them. And throw them outside. Don't kill them. Even sort of like with a shinui, you can't do it. Even when they're biting you. You can't throw them in the water because they're going to drown there. Killing insects and other living creatures will be discussed further in the next year. So you're not allowed to kill. You're not allowed to do chavol. You can't even wound. Omnam. He says you can't protest very strongly against those that are lenient, that are to trap them. Even though they're just on the inside of your garment, they're not even, biting you, even that they're not even on your skin. If you can't get rid of them without trapping them. Earlier we saw that according to the Shulchan Aruch Harav, one may not trap an insect such as a wasp, whose sting would not harm a person, but could merely cause some pain. In light of the sources that we have seen now, it would seem that if a wasp or other stinging insect is on one's body and appears to be preparing to sting, you could trap it. If it's merely flying nearby, it would not be permitted to trap it, despite the potential pain and distress inflicted if it would indeed sting a person. The Hilchos Shabbos rules this way in practice, and so does Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. Balei chaim she'ein shichosam kosher. Living things that when they bite you, it's not too bad. Kolkach, k'gon sira, like a wasp. Or dvora, bee. Ein heter l'tzodim amanas limnoa mehem lazik. You can't trap them to prevent them from damaging. Unless as we've discovered, they're on your skin, they're on your body. Then you have answer to do so. By contrast, a number of contemporary authorities, including the Kitzur Hilchos Shabbos and Rav Simcha Bunim Cohen, rule that wasps, yellow jackets, hornets, and even bees can inflict considerable pain and harm, and one may trap them when necessary. See Dor Malaktim, who cites other poskim who are lenient, including Sefer Nishmas Shabbos, Rav Shmuel First. Many of us met him here in my home. He's the big posek in Chicago, who's a Talmud Muvik of Moshe Feinstein, and Rav Avigdor Nebensal. So you have people to rely on, big people. I'm sure if Rav First is lenient, he heard it from Rav Moshe, because I know Rav First. That's how he operates. Maybe Rav Moshe never wrote about it in the Hilchos Moshe, but it must be that Rav First heard it from him. I can't say that for sure, but I would guess. Kitzur Hilchos Shabbos. V'chein dvor tzirish shabos lahokzo, a bee, right, or a wasp that's coming to sting. You can put a kli over it. Because on these you could say that it's a damaging bite. He says depending on where you're bitten, it could cause extreme pain. For example, near your eye. Susie says some people are allergic. So absolutely. Says the Shabbos home. That must be Rav Simcha Bunim Cohen. If a person is afraid that a stinging insect, such as a bee or wasp or hornet, will sting him or someone else, he's permitted to trap it on Shabbos, since the bites of these insects can cause severe pain. However, the trapping should not be done with a device that is especially made for that purpose. Rather, it should be done in a makeshift way, such as placing a cup over the insect. Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach discusses whether a malacha she'ein tzrich lagufa might be permitted in a case in which there's no physical pain, but there's emotional pain. Rosh Shlomo Zalman rules that the leniency applies only to physical distress and not to emotional or mental distress. This ruling comes from a discussion concerning extinguishing a fire which threatens only property and not human life. That circumstance would be unusual today. In such a case, it's forbidden to extinguish the fire directly. Rosh Shlomo Zalman claims that this is the case even if one may suffer emotional distress related to losing one's possession in the fire. The subject of extinguishing fires on Shabbos nowadays will be discussed in detail in a future vol.
But
Today
some people are really deathly afraid of bee stings. I mean, my late wife was that way. I mean, it's not quite like losing your property in a fire. It's afraid if you're going to get bitten, it's really bad. So I mean, I don't know that they're comparable. It seemed to me that, especially for people who are highly sensitive about it, it's definitely a step above just worried about losing your possessions in fire.
Okay. You want to say that there might be a more emotional or mental
Absolutely.
distress in it because people have like a phobia.
Correct.
Phobia.
Phobia. I think it's normal to be terribly afraid.
We are lenient regarding fires today, primarily because of our non-Jewish neighbors. That because it's a danger that the fire could spread, and then there's Mishum Eva, they're going to start a riot, and I'm sure that's what we'll discuss that when we go through the Tzurba. But
I don't know what Yaakov's saying, but this is much more of a psychological issue. So if you have a psychological issue that people get so nervous, it's a sakona for them.
And
It's like on a Shabbos, you have a problem. You have a real problem, which is in your mind. I mean, I don't know if it's
right, but Rav Shlomo Zalman, they bringing this case of Rav Shlomo Zalman to try to argue that emotional distress is not a reason to violate Shabbos.
Yeah,
Now,
I'm not there.
Yaakov wants to say that this is on a higher level.
Yeah, but
Almost like a pikuach nefesh or suffik pikuach nefesh. That's what you have to argue, and that's what you have to argue to go beyond what Rav Shlomo Zalman is saying.
If you've ever seen a person who has that kind of fear,
right,
she gets
phobia.
bitten by an insect, it's off the charts. It's hard to describe.
It's like a phobia. It's like that they can I don't know what it's a serious matter.
Yeah, and Hanami, I think he's trying to make that argument. I think that argument is well taken. Says the Minchas Shloima, Avagav the Metzina la Rosh Kosev Bereish Perek Shmona Shrotzim B'Misha Parish Oimed Al Tzaro. Even though he's quoting the Rosh, that if a flea is on a person's flesh, the noshchon, it's biting him. Mutter likachenu lashlicho, you can take him physically and get rid of him. You're not really trapping him, you're doing it to avoid being bitten. He says, even though by financial loss, which he wants to argue that the pain and suffering is much more, he says, much more than being bitten by an insect. It remains prohibited to put the fire out. Tsar guf, so that means we're talking about a case where you're being bitten. So you have tsar guf. So according to Rav Shlomo Zalman, the halacha regarding the case of a biting flea demonstrates that malacha she'ein tzrich laguf allows for leniency only in the case of physical pain and not just distress. This may have implications for other cases of distress as well. Many contemporary posts can identify mental health as a halacha consideration, particularly for those contending with clinically recognized ailments. and this will too. This is a major issue in halacha, where there seems to be a lacuna. That means an absence of dealing with psychological illnesses by poskim. Some of the, like Rav Minchas, the Minchas Osher, Rav Osher Weiss, is very sensitive to it, and he's very lenient regarding that. But some of the earlier poskim didn't even recognize that there were, post-traumatic stress syndrome and depression and all this stuff. It wasn't even discussed. And now there's more discussion of it. And I think there's a lack, this brings us up. What Yaakov and Walter are trying to discuss here, where the level of emotional mental distress isn't recognized by some of the earlier poskim. There's no question about it. What about animals that move extremely slowly? What about a snail? Right? They're according to bet whether it's forbidden midrabanan to trap animals like an ant or a tortoise that move extremely slowly. According to some such animals are categorized as already trapped, and therefore there's no prohibition to trap them, much like animals that are already caged. Rav Shlomo Zalman was among those who permitted trapping such an animal. As support for his position, he cited the Toisas Harid, who discusses the identity of the chomet, one of 8 creeping animals, arguing that the snail moves so slowly that seizing it cannot be considered trapping. The Rid concludes that the snail cannot be the chomet, which is subject to trapping. I mean, he wanted to argue that since there is a prohibition of trapping a chomet, they were trying to identify, well, what is the chomet, a snail? He wanted to argue it's not a snail because there would be no problem of trapping a snail. Right? Somebody wanted to say, oh, the snail is the chomet. He says it can't be. The Shmona Shrotzim, of which the chomet is one of them, if you trap them or wound them, you're chayiv on Shabbos. If the snail is the identity of what the Torah refers to as the chomet, might say the shaycha, but there would be no hunting it. He goes so slow, he's trapped already. Any chalazos cannot be oser. By contrast, Rav Elyashiv forbids trapping these animals, which he brings as support from the following of Rabbeinu Yerucham. Rabbeinu Yerucham was a Rishon. Ushar shrotzim kagon tolat v'chel zonot, right? The chilazon, that's a snail. Tolat is a worm. Bakrovim is a scorpion. Hatzadan l'tzorach, if you trap them because you need them for some purpose, chayiv. Now, if you're just trapping them to avoid them from coming into your house, whatever, shlo l'tzorach potter of a loser. It's not potter in mutter, but it's potter of a loser. Thus, according to some, it's forbidden midrabanan to trap ants and other slimmer pets, even if one is trapping merely to prevent their nuisance and damage. However, Rav Nissim Karelitz notes that all would agree it is permitted to pour water or another substance around the ants in such a way that it will prevent them from spreading. So the Mishnah Berurah says Dirshu. There's a relatively newer edition of the Mishnah Berurah, the Dirshu edition, where they bring a lot of remember the Mishnah Berurah died in 1933. So in the back of every simon, they'll bring, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, the Chazon Ish. Here they're going to bring Rav Nissim Karelitz. So they bring later Achronim after the Mishnah Berurah regarding their opinions on whatever the Mishnah Berurah brings. So that's what's unique about Dirshu. That's why they're quoting this Dirshu, because I guess they have a statement of Rav Karelitz regarding it. Right? You want to pour water. Let's say you see a whole bunch of ants. I guess you want the ants to not come into your house or whatever. So he permits pouring water on the ground so that they won't go there. Svivot nimalim, around the ants, kadesh lo yispashtu b'bayis, so they won't spread. Das agon of Nissim Karel, it's in the Chut Shani, shemutar. After that, shetziz balchaim iti asura. Even according to those Manda Omrim who hold that you cannot trap slow animals. Mishum shenamolim davar she'ena b'mina nitzud. He uses a different svara. Nobody traps ants. What do you need ants? It's not in the norm to trap them. So uvitzeided rabbanon in a trapping which would only be midrabbanon, which is to keep you. What do they mean seided rabbanon? Seided deraisa is when you are trapping the animal to use, like they did in the Mishkan. Seided rabbanon means keeping it away from you. Now, that's normally potra of a lasser.
8:40 p.m.
What was that?
I don't know.
Where'd that come? Oh, that came from my watch. Okay. But in Yesh Lahakel Kenechshavim Kenitzorim Lagame B'chol Matzah, an ant moves so slowly that it's considered as if they're trapped. Then you could sort of minimize their living space. What about closing a window to protect oneself from the cold? And then let's say there's an animal that's going to be trapped by you closing that window. In the case of trapping, which closing a window would constitute forbidden trapping only midrabbanan, which we mean it's so the Mishnah Berurah sign the Chayodim rules that it would be permitted to close the window in order to avoid discomfort, such as to keep out the cold, without the attempt to trap whatever animal might be inside. In this case, the trapping performed by closing the open window is a malacha she'ein tzrich lagufa. You don't need the animal, right? Normally, the trapping in the Mishkan was because you needed the animal. Here, you might be trapping it, but it's not for the purpose that trapping was done at the Mishkan, which defines it as a malacha she'ein tzrich lagufa. So even in a case which would definitely result in trapping, so we know for sure the animal in that room is trapped, and therefore it's a psik reisha. You know for sure that it's going to happen. If the person does not care about the trapping, and if enclosing the animal within the relatively large open space of a house would be forbidden only rabbanon, the prohibition does not apply to protecting oneself from the cold air. This is relevant for certain birds or other insects that cannot be fully trapped in a house. Let's say one of these sparrows fly into your house, tzipor dror, shenichnas labayis derech haPesach, either your open door or chalon. Now, if a bird flies into your house, it's not considered trapped because you can't get it. Remember how we defined it? You got to be able to get it in one step. Good luck. You're not going to be able to get it just because it's in your house. So you have to do an act of trapping still in your house. Right? He's not considered trapped yet. You're not allowed to close the door or the window. Now you've completely trapped it. Can't get out. Bizman HaKor, but if it's cold and you have a reason to close the window to keep yourself warm, she is tzar tzina. You're allowed to close the window or the door. He doesn't have anything in his mind about trapping that bird. He wants to keep warm. Venerot's a cloud that says that tzipor, kivadein but seder doraisa. It's not a seder doraisa. It's only rabbanon. You're doing it in a lacha she'ein tzrich lagufa way. You have tsar. So where all of these are snifim lahakel. Avagav david psik reisha b'rabbanon. Normally psik reisha b'rabbanon we're machmir. Aval b'shar chayev va'of t'shayich bod seder doraisa. But other animals or birds where there would be seder midoraisa, afal gav david psik reisha b'rabbanon. even though it's a psik reisha. Aval b'shar chai v'of t'shech b'tzei d'oraisa, the bias osir afal gav she'ein, even though you're not mechavin klal david psik reisha, but because it's a deraisa, we are more machmir. This is the case only for cases where the species in question is typically trapped, such as birds and deers. But species that are not typically trapped are only subject to trapping Rabbanon. The leniency of the Mishnah Berurah would apply, even in a house.
Small enclosure.
Vuz,
It says even in a small enclosure.
even in a small enclosure. The Hilchos Shabbos writes that if a closed door is open to an area in which an animal is enclosed, when they close the door, even when it traps the animal, provided that the enclosure is a large one, such that the animal is not defined as fully trapped inside on a Torah level. Baal Chaim animtza b'makom soger shebo hu mugdar kenitzud. If an animal is in a closed place, where it's defined that it's a trapped animal at that, v'niftacha delet, and then the door was opened. Asr lachzor v'lazogro. You can't then close it again. V'yesh b'zeser Torah. Achim balachayim nimtza b'makom gadol sheina begeda nitza. But if the animal was in a larger space where he wouldn't be considered trapped, v'nifchata delet, and the door open, mutter lachzor v'liskor. You can close it. Given sheina iser Torah b'skiras adelet, there's no midoraisa prohibition to close it. L'gazor chacham misr tzeda b'ofen shebalchayim kvar hayasoger sham. There's no trapping because he was there already. Bitam zeh, yesh lizar b'dover hamotzu kishmachnisim oichel lebalei chayim hamni imtziim b'toch kluv. You're out, your dog's in a cage, and you bring food to your dog in the cage. He says, "Lo liftoches adelet shel hakluv." Don't open the cage door. If you open up too much, it will escape. Because if you open it up, it'll be prohibited for you to close it because of trapping. Just open it up very narrowly. Or block it with your arm, so you have some issues if you have pets, how to feed them in a cage. Thus far, we have discussed.
Hold on a second, but what if it's a domesticated animal? Why would you have a situation where you have a situation of trapping? It's a domesticated animal.
Because right now, if you open up the cage, the animal's going to escape. You're keeping it in the cage. You don't want him for a purpose. You're keeping it.
But you're keeping it in a cage because that's where the dog is basically when you put a dog in a cage, the dog feels more comfortable and they stay there. Okay, they don't make in a house or something like that. That's what a cage is about. So it's a domesticated animal. A dog is a domesticated animal.
It certainly would only be midrabanan. Like we said, it's only birds and deer.
Yeah, but you're not trapping the thing. You're not trapping it. It's in your house.
Yeah, because you've got it in an enclosure right now. So by opening it up and it runs away, so they don't want you to do that because if you close, that means if you close the door, if you open it up wide enough that it could escape, by closing, and the dog still remains in there and you close it, you've trapped it in there. So that's why they're suggesting when you bring the food, just open it up a little bit so it couldn't run out. So you didn't do an act of trapping. But you died.
What happens if it's in your house? I mean, it's in your house. You trapped it in your house. That's not considered trapping. It's in your home.
No, we're talking about it. You're trapping it in the cage. The animal's in its cage. If you open it up, it escapes. So that implies that by keeping the door closed, you're trapping it. So when they have a problem with opening it to feed it, where it could possibly escape, once it's escaped from your cage, it's escaped. And therefore it's considered as if you've trapped it by closing the door. Otherwise, what are you keeping it in a cage for? Most people keep it in a cage.
I'm telling you why they're keeping it in a cage today. They keep it in they basically keep it in a cage because basically the animals, just to tell you, an animal feels very comfortable in its Dalet Amos, and it feels at home. So you open it up, it feels at
So maybe they're talking about a cage that's outside, not in your house. And that if you open it up, it could run away completely.
Right. That's a different thing. Okay, obviously.
That must be what they're talking about. That's certainly that makes it an easier case to understand. What about setting a trap? We have discussed actively trapping an animal on Shabbos. According to Tosfos, it's forbidden midrabanan to set a trap on Shabbos. Remember, you're not acting the animal that you set a trap so that if an animal comes by, maybe it'll get trapped. So you can't even set that up on Shabbos. Ain portion mitzudos. You don't spread out traps. Afagav de b'Shabbos nami im pirsh mitzudi and chayiv chatas. Now, if you actually put out a trap on Shabbos, it's not a av malacha that you would bring a chatas for. It's only midrabanan. Because you don't know for sure that an animal is going to end up coming into your trap. Any odem yitzurim la. Makom gozru. It's a gzeira. Lifrosh mitzuda. To open up a trap. The pami must lidechi of chatas. Kagon shebeshas prisasa yilkod. Sometimes it'll happen right when you spread out the trap, it gets trapped right away. Then you'd have a problem. If you open up a trap and immediately while you're doing it, it comes into the trap, you've hunted it, you've trapped it. So that's a gzeir midrabanan, you can't do it. And the Mishnah Berurah says as well, he says if you lay out a trap and an animal walks into your trap on Shabbos, you're chayav chatas. It's only prohibited midrabanan to set the trap, and then 2 hours later it comes in there. Don't put out mouse traps on Shabbos. It's a gzeira. It's not midoraisa, it's midrabanan. Based on this, it seems that it's permitted to set a trap before Shabbos, even if the trap will ensnare animals on Shabbos. The basis for this comes from the permission to set up utensils on Erev Shabbos that will cause malacha to be done on Shabbos, in accordance with the opinion of Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai in portion mitzudas chayv oifus v'dogim ela kadesh yitzurim ibodyo. Beis Shammai says you can't set up traps on Friday unless you know for sure it's going to be trapped prior to Shabbos. Beis Hillel matirim. Beis Hillel permit you, for example, according to Beis Hillel, you could set it up 1 minute before Shabbos.
I don't get it. If we're concerned that you're actually going to catch the animal while you're setting up the trap, certainly if you have a minute, you that could also capture the animal.
No, but on Friday there's no gzeir. On Friday, that's only on Shabbos, Yaakov. That if it gets trapped right away when you opened up the trap on Shabbos, you can be chayv chatas.
Right, but it says.
So now it's Friday. So there's no. You agree? There's no gzeir to trap. If you did it 5 minutes before Shabbos and an animal walked into your trap, you haven't violated anything.
But he says he permits doing so even if there's insufficient time for animals to be trapped before Shabbos. There's never insufficient time. If we talk about it, if we worry that you'll actually trap the animal while you're setting the trap. So there's always
it could happen.
Time. Yeah.
It could happen.
Correct.
And therefore on Shabbos and that would cause you to have a chiyuv chatas. So that's why on Shabbos they told you don't open up any trap on Shabbos. But that gzeira doesn't extend to Friday.
Right,
that-
but the reason for the reason Beis Hillel says it's permitted is because if you set it up right before Shabbos, there's insufficient time for the animal to be trapped before Shabbos. And what I'm saying is that's not a possible scenario. If we're concerned that the animal will actually be trapped while you're setting the trap, there's always sufficient time for the animal to be trapped before Shabbos.
Yeah, but
Even
not to the point. But not to the point where Beis Hillel. There's no reason for Beis Hillel to make a gzeira that maybe could get trapped right now, because it's a Friday. There's no chiyuv on Friday. It's just their machlokas between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai here is whether or not the kli that you've set up is going to do its malacha on Shabbos.
But
So Beis Shammai
if-
doesn't want you to do it. That Beis Shammai says that if you set some, and this has to do with Shabbos clocks and other things. Beis Shammai says that if you set up a kli, and that kli is going to function on Shabbos, you're not allowed to set up the kli on Friday. According to Beis Hillel, if you set up the kli on Friday, even though that kli does its act on Shabbos, you're not chayiv. And that's why we hold that you could set up a Shabbos clock from Friday, and it does, even though it's going to turn something out on Shabbos, that's not a problem for Beis Hillel. That's what the point of Nakuda here is. And he's trying to say, even if there's, that means Beis Hillel goes Beis Shammai requires the trap that you set up on Friday to do its job on Friday. If it hasn't done its job on Friday, it means if you don't have enough time on Friday when you set up the trap, Beis Shammai doesn't allow you to put up the trap at all. Beis Hillel isn't worried about that. Beis Hillel understands, like you, that it could come right away, but there's no reason to make a gzeira there. And then even if the trapping happens on Shabbos, Beis Hillel permits it. And we'll see this machlokas will come in all the various things that we do that happen automatically. Let's see what the Yalkut Yosef says. Osir lifros mitzuda b'Shabbos af k'dei lotzud achbar. You can't set out a mouse trap on Shabbos. Afal b'shein achbar nitzud tekav b'Shabbos prises l'mitzuda. Even though when you put down the mouse trap, the mouse didn't get trapped in there. Afal lipros me'erev Shabbos mutter. But you can set up all the traps you want from erev Shabbos. If the trap successfully ensnares an animal, it is permitted to release the animal on Shabbos without touching it. Because again, muktzah, we're going to talk about muktzah soon. You can free a trapped animal on Shabbos. The prohibition is to trap it. You can't touch it. And that's what our Rebbeim taught us when I was young. That's one of they used to tell us that the reason the Gedolim didn't have pets was because of this issue of muktzah. But we're going to get to it. We certainly have lenient opinions today regarding that. But any questions, comments, Aros? Okay, very good. I think this sugi about animals is very interesting. Have a good Shabbos, everybody.
You all, good Shabbos.
This week we'll be back to Tuesday night. Okay?
Shalom, everybody.
Shalom.